A legendary garden flourished in the middle of a desert. This is the enduring mystery of the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, a wonder whose very existence hinges on an impossible question. How could a lush, multi-tiered paradise survive in the arid heart of Mesopotamia? By the end of this exploration, you will possess a complete picture of the ingenious hydraulic engineering that might have powered this ancient marvel. We will uncover how water was secretly lifted against gravity and distributed through hidden channels, turning stone terraces into a living spectacle. What does it truly take to make a desert bloom against all odds? Our only direct window into this vanished world comes from the words of travelers who came long after the fact. Classical historians like Diodorus Siculus and Strabo, writing hundreds of years after Babylon's peak, described a sight that defied belief. They spoke of ascending terraces, supported by a forest of stone columns, rising tier upon tier like a man-made mountain. The entire structure, they claimed, was irrigated by machinery hidden within, water lifted secretly to the very top to cascade down through channels and nourish the roots of exotic trees. This was a gift, they said, from the great King Nebuchadnezzar II to a queen from a green, mountainous land, a living consolation to ease her longing for home. Their accounts are vivid, painting a picture of plants spilling over balconies, creating the illusion of a lush green curtain hanging in mid-air. This is the legendary blueprint that has captivated imaginations for 2 millennia. But we must read these ancient texts with a careful eye. These are not engineering reports, they are second-hand stories, a mix of tourist wonder and inherited legend, written centuries after any gardener would have last tended a single shrub. The inconsistencies are telling. Some describe the gardens as being near the Euphrates River, others place them squarely on the royal palace grounds. The dimensions vary, the precise mechanics are glossed over with poetic mystery. So what can we truly extract from these ancient postcards? We can trust the core wonder, the central problem they all point to. A massive, elevated garden in a desert required an unprecedented and constant supply of water. The specific details of the machinery may be lost in translation, but the need for a hidden, powerful hydraulic system is the one undeniable fact that emerges from the legend. This realization shifts our search from the pages of history to the dust of the earth, pulling us toward the physical heart of the mystery, the sprawling, sun-baked ruins of Babylon itself. Yet the ground beneath our feet tells a more complicated story. Generations of archaeologists have sifted through the sun-bleached ruins of Babylon, mapping its grand processional way and the foundations of its mighty walls. They have uncovered palaces and temples, but the hanging gardens have remained stubbornly invisible. No stone tablets boast of their construction. No clear footprint of terraced platforms has been conclusively identified. This absence is the central conundrum, a silent void where a wonder should be. How can something so magnificent in description leave no definitive trace? One compelling answer lies in the very nature of a garden. Think of what it is made of: soil, roots, and wooden supports, all materials that return to the earth over centuries. In a climate like Mesopotamia's, with its cycles of flooding and intense heat, organic evidence is the first to vanish. A sophisticated stone water system, however, might endure long after the last leaf has turned to dust. And this is where the puzzle takes a fascinating turn. In the royal palace complex, excavators have found strange, vaulted chambers with walls of extraordinary thickness. Nearby are features that look remarkably like deep, stone-lined wells. To a modern eye, these structures seem oddly industrial, out of place in a ceremonial space. Could they be the hidden machinery described by the ancient historians? The skeletal remains of a massive hydraulic pump, now stripped of its wooden gears and leather buckets. It is a tantalizing possibility, but not proof. The frustrating lack of a smoking gun forces a shift in strategy. If we cannot find the garden itself, we must instead understand the world that could have built it. We turn from searching for a specific plot of land to examining the city's mastery over its most precious and defiant resource, water. Babylon was not just any city in the desert, it was a hydraulic empire. Its survival and splendor were built upon an intimate, relentless battle to control the Euphrates River. Canals crisscrossed the landscape like arteries, directing water to fields and into the city's very heart. The Babylonians were brilliant water engineers, capable of constructing sluice gates, reservoirs, and sophisticated irrigation networks. This broader canvas of innovation is our best clue. It tells us that the technology needed to lift water to a great height did not need to be invented for a garden. It likely already existed in the minds and hands of the king's engineers. The real question then becomes not if they could do it, but how they might have scaled that technology to create a living spectacle. The gardens, if they existed, would not have been a magical anomaly, but the ultimate expression of a civilization's water-wielding power. This realization pulls us from the dusty silence of the ruins into the vibrant, echoing sounds of a working machine, inviting us to reconstruct the ingenious mechanics that could have made the impossible flow. The Euphrates was more than a river, it was the city's beating heart. This great waterway, flowing just beyond the western walls, presented both a promise and a profound challenge. Its waters were the lifeblood of the empire, but they were not a gentle resource. The river's flow was a seasonal drama, swelling with spring melt from distant mountains and receding under the punishing summer sun. It carried not just water, but immense quantities of fine silt, a gift for agriculture but a constant threat to any delicate machinery. To dream of a hanging garden was first to master this unpredictable giant. Babylonian engineers did not just draw water from the Euphrates, they conducted it. They built an entire hydraulic landscape, a secondary network of canals that acted like veins branching from a main artery. One major canal, historians believe, may have been the Nar Babil, literally the River of Babylon. This was no simple trench. It was a carefully engineered channel, likely lined with baked bricks and bitumen to prevent erosion and seepage. Its purpose was strategic, to divert a manageable, controlled stream of water from the main river and guide it directly into the city's core toward the palace and temple districts. Think of it as installing a dedicated water main for the royal precinct. This was the first and most crucial principle of their hydraulic system, creating a reliable, close-at-hand source. But control meant constant vigilance. Sluice gates, massive wooden or stone barriers, would have been raised or lowered to regulate the flow, especially during flood season. Settlement basins where water could slow and deposit its heavy silt load would have been essential to keep the intake clear. Every step was a battle against nature's chaos to create order, to transform a wild, muddy river into a predictable, clean supply line. Without this foundational mastery, any talk of lifting water to dazzling heights is just fantasy. The silent, sun-baked remains of these canals are the uncelebrated first chapter of the garden story, the proof that Babylon had already solved the problem of bringing the river to its doorstep. This established a steady, pressurized starting point, setting the stage for the system's true masterpiece, the ingenious machine that would defy gravity itself. The river was now at their doorstep, but the garden dreamed of reaching for the sky. With a controlled canal bringing water into the palace grounds, the engineers faced their defining trial, lifting that precious cargo straight up against the pull of gravity. This was the system's pivotal moment where brute force had to marry elegant mechanics. To create a living mountain, they first had to build an invisible waterfall, one that flowed perpetually upward. The most elegant solution might have been a device we strongly associate with a later genius, the Archimedes Screw. Picture a massive wooden cylinder wrapped with a spiraling partition inside, like a corkscrew set within a pipe. One end sits submerged in the canal's water, while the other angles up toward the garden's highest terrace. As laborers turn a crank, the entire screw rotates. With each turn, a pocket of water is trapped at the bottom of the spiral and carried up the tube, only to spill out at the top. It is a beautifully simple principle, using a helical path to coax water upward with minimal turbulence. While the famous Greek inventor Archimedes would perfect and document this device centuries later, the core idea of a spiral lifting water is so fundamental that it could have emerged independently in the workshops of Babylon. A single screw could lift water perhaps 20 or 30 feet, but the gardens were described as being far taller. The solution was staging, using multiple screws in succession, each one lifting its load to an intermediate reservoir where the next machine would take over. This created a mechanical relay race, passing water from one level to the next until it crowned the entire structure. But there was another, potentially more powerful contender, the chain pump. Imagine a giant treadmill powered by teams of laborers walking in a continuous circle. This treadmill turns a vertical wheel, from which hangs an endless loop of square pallet buckets or a chain fitted with ceramic cups. As the wheel turns, the empty buckets dip into the source water at the bottom, fill, and are then carried up and over the top of the wheel, where they tip their contents into a waiting channel before descending again for another load. It is less graceful than the screw, but it can move a tremendous volume of water with a relentless, rhythmic efficiency. The choice between these machines speaks volumes about the Babylonian approach. They were not necessarily inventing entirely new physics, they were mastering the art of scaling up. They took principles understood in the workshop, the screw, the lever, the treadmill, and magnified them to a monumental degree. This transforms our understanding of the garden's foundation. Beneath those blooming terraces would have lain a hidden, humid chamber, a sacred engine room. Here, in shadowy spaces thick with the smell of wet wood and sweating oxen, teams of workers or animals would have provided the relentless muscle, turning cranks or treading wheels in a never-ending cycle. The serene beauty above was powered by a world of coordinated labor and rhythmic sound below, a hidden heartbeat thrumming to make the desert bloom. The water now crowned the highest terrace, a silent victory against gravity. But this was only half the battle. To create a living landscape, that single point of water had to become 1,000 gentle threads, weaving through soil and stone without washing the entire garden away. This was the third principle, distribution, and it demanded a precision equal to the lift itself. Think of it as building a miniature, artificial watershed. From the main reservoir at the summit, a hidden network would have branched out. Lead pipes, expensive but malleable, or more likely fired ceramic conduits, were probably laid within the thick terrace walls. These would feed into open clay channels or carefully carved stone gullies set into the floors of each garden level. The entire design relied on a masterful understanding of gentle slopes. Each channel was not a steep chute, but a barely perceptible incline, just enough to keep the water moving at a slow, trickling pace. This allowed it to seep into planting beds through small openings or to cascade softly from one level to the next in a series of tiny, controlled waterfalls. The goal was to mimic the natural seep of a mountain spring, not the destructive force of a flash flood. To manage this flow, simple sluice gates made of wood or bronze could be inserted at key junctions. A gardener could block or open a channel to direct hydration to a thirsty section of figs or date palms, creating a rudimentary but effective irrigation schedule. The true ingenuity, however, lay in making this entire watery web hold its secret. The construction materials of Babylon were primarily sun-dried mud brick and baked clay brick, both porous and vulnerable to constant moisture. A leak would not just waste water, it would silently undermine the structural integrity of the very walls supporting the gardens. The solution was a substance the Mesopotamians knew intimately: bitumen. This thick, black petroleum tar, which bubbled up from natural seeps in the region, was their ancient waterproofing marvel. Heated until viscous, it would have been painstakingly plastered along the interior of every channel and pipe, and likely between the bricks themselves, creating a flexible, impermeable seal. This invisible lining transformed the network from a potential disaster into a reliable circulatory system. Every root, from the deepest shade tree to the most delicate hanging vine, was connected to this hidden lifeline. It was a system of quiet abundance, where the roar of the lifting machinery gave way to the soft whisper of water finding its way home, drop by deliberate drop, to the waiting earth. Every drop of water now had a destination, a purpose woven into the very bones of the structure. The terraces were far more than decorative platforms. They were the system's final, brilliant innovation, engineered containers built to sustain life under impossible conditions. To understand them, you must forget a simple mound of earth. Picture instead a meticulously crafted sandwich, each layer serving a vital, non-negotiable role. At the very bottom, supporting the entire weight, historians suggest a foundation of massive stone slabs. This detail is significant, for stone was a luxury in the mud-brick plains of Babylon, imported at great cost. Its use signals an understanding that ordinary materials would fail, that the constant saturation from above demanded a bedrock-like base immune to erosion and shifting. Upon this stone canvas, the builders would have painted a masterpiece of waterproofing. A thick layer of reeds or woven palm fronds acted as a cushion and a drainage mat. Then came the bitumen, that ubiquitous black tar, heated and spread to form a seamless, flexible seal. In some accounts, a sheet of lead, hammered thin, was laid on top, providing a final, impervious barrier. This layered membrane was the garden's secret skin, a shield against the very element that gave it life. Its purpose was dual: to protect the structural integrity of the bricks and mortar below from dissolving into mud, and to protect the plants above from drowning. Without it, water would seep downward, weakening the foundations while simultaneously pooling around the roots in the soil, causing rot and disease. The genius was in creating a basin, an artificial pond in reverse, where moisture was meant to be held only in one specific zone, the soil itself, and upon this prepared foundation they built the world. A deep bed of rich imported soil mixed with compost and nutrients was carefully mounded. This was the garden's flesh, held securely in its engineered cradle. The waterproof base ensured that when water trickled through from the channels above, it would hydrate the soil thoroughly but then drain excess away, keeping roots aerated and healthy. Each terrace, therefore, was a self-contained ecosystem, a giant, elevated planter box of staggering scale and sophistication. It was not merely holding plants, it was collaborating with the hydraulic system, a stable, breathing recipient designed for a perpetual, gentle rain. The weight calculations alone are staggering. Wet soil is immensely heavy, and these terraces were stacked stories high. Every column, every arch, every vaulted chamber below was precisely calibrated to bear this living, water-fed load for decades. This transforms the hanging gardens from a mere landscaping project into a profound feat of environmental engineering. They were not just placing a garden in a desert, they were fabricating the very ground it grew in, constructing an entire miniature, fertile hillside where none could naturally exist. The stone, the tar, the lead, and the soil were all partners in an elaborate deception, a performance of abundance whose success depended on every layer playing its part perfectly. And if the terraces were the body of this artificial landscape, then the plants were its soul, the final, living proof of the system's triumph. But what were these terraces and channels actually made of? The answer lies not in a single miracle substance, but in a carefully curated palette of materials, each selected for a specific, brutal job. The gardens were a permanent war against two relentless enemies, water and time. In the saline, mineral-rich environment of Mesopotamia, constant moisture was a corrosive force that could dissolve mud and crumble stone. To survive, the structure needed a skeleton and a skin engineered for endurance. The first and most vital component was bitumen. This thick, black tar, bubbling up naturally from the earth in places like Hit, just up the Euphrates, was the Mesopotamian equivalent of modern polymer sealant. When heated, it became a viscous, sticky liquid that could be plastered onto surfaces or mixed with sand and gravel to form a waterproof mortar. Its use was widespread, from lining canals to caulking boats, but in the gardens it would have been the invisible guardian. Every seam between bricks, the interior of every water channel, the very bedding layers of the terraces would have been coated in this impermeable black shield. It was a locally sourced miracle, transforming porous clay into a barrier that laughed at seepage. For the most critical water channels, especially those carrying fast-moving streams from the lifting devices, bitumen might not have been enough. Here, the builders may have turned to a truly luxurious material, lead. Imported and expensive, lead sheets could be hammered thin and shaped to line a channel with a smooth, durable, and perfectly watertight surface. It would have been a statement of extreme opulence and technical necessity, ensuring that not a single precious drop was lost to absorption on its journey to the plants. And holding all of this immense, sodden weight aloft, that task likely fell to fired brick. While most common buildings in Babylon used sun-dried mud brick, a garden perpetually soaked from within demanded something stronger. Fired bricks baked in kilns at high temperatures become ceramic, hard and nearly impervious to water. They would have formed the load-bearing arches, the vaults of the hidden chambers, and the thick retaining walls of the terraces themselves. This material choice reveals the staggering scale of the project's logistics. Procuring enough bitumen, importing lead, and firing millions of bricks required more than royal wealth. It demanded a highly organized economy and armies of specialized craftsmen, from miners and kiln workers to master bricklayers and plumbers. This wasn't a haphazard collection of stuff. It was the culmination of centuries of Mesopotamian building science, a material symphony composed for one purpose: to make a living dream endure against every force that sought to return it to dust. Every brick, every channel, every drop of water relied on a force far greater than any machine. This was the human engine, a vast and intricate network of labor that breathed life into the stone and soil. The true scale of the hanging gardens is measured not in cubits, but in the countless hands that shaped them. Behind the serene facade of blooming terraces stood an army of thousands, each with a specialized role in a meticulously choreographed operation. Master engineers, the architects of the invisible, would have designed the hydraulic pathways and structural supports. Armies of brickmakers labored at kilns, firing the millions of ceramic blocks needed for waterproof construction. Carpenters shaped the giant screws and treadwheels, while metalworkers forged the tools and perhaps the delicate lead linings for crucial pipes. Then came the operators, the permanent crew who kept the heart of the garden beating. Teams of laborers, likely working in shifts, would have trod the endless circles of the water-lifting wheels or turned the great cranks of the Archimedes screws. Skilled gardeners, understanding the needs of imported species, would have tended each terrace, managing the sluice gates and monitoring the health of the plants. This was not a temporary project, but a perpetual commitment, a machine that required constant human fuel to keep its illusion of effortless abundance alive. Feeding, housing, and directing this multitude was a logistical triumph equal to the engineering. The workforce needed barracks, kitchens, and fresh water, all organized within or near the bustling palace complex. This points to the formidable administrative power of Nebuchadnezzar's court, a bureaucracy capable of managing such a colossal, ongoing endeavor. The labor itself was likely drawn from a system common to powerful ancient states. Many workers would have been citizens fulfilling a corvée obligation, a period of service owed to the king for public works. Others, as historical records from the era indicate, may have included prisoners taken in military campaigns or individuals in various states of servitude. This aspect forms a complex layer in the story of many ancient wonders, where breathtaking human achievement is intertwined with systems of social obligation and control. The gardens, in their serene beauty, were also a profound display of organized human effort, a monument that transformed individual toil into a collective, enduring legend. Their survival depended as much on the unbroken rhythm of the laborer's step as on the flow of water, a reminder that the most sophisticated machine is ultimately powered by people. This human foundation leads us to a final, haunting question, one that echoes from the silent ruins. If the system was so brilliant and the labor so vast, why did this wonder ultimately vanish without a clear trace? Yet this immense human and material effort leads us to a profound historical silence. For all the ingenuity we have reconstructed, the physical evidence in Babylon remains frustratingly indirect. This absence has not gone unchallenged. A compelling and radical alternative has emerged from the scholarly world, one that proposes a startling solution to the mystery. What if we have been searching in the wrong city entirely? The prominent Assyriologist Dr. Stephanie Daly has championed a theory that shifts the wonder hundreds of miles north and nearly a century back in time. She argues the Hanging Gardens were not built by Nebuchadnezzar in Babylon, but by the Assyrian king Sennacherib in his magnificent capital of Nineveh. This is not a casual suggestion, it is a hypothesis built on a remarkable foundation of primary evidence. Sennacherib himself left behind extensive inscriptions, boasting in stone of his great engineering projects. In them, he describes creating a vast, paradise-like garden for his palace, a marvel to rival any in the world. He speaks of solving the immense water problem by constructing a canal system over 30 miles long, bringing water from distant mountains. Most strikingly, he details the use of an innovative water-raising device, describing screws made of bronze that lifted water continuously to the highest levels. This is not a later traveler's tale, it is a contemporary king's own proud record of his achievement. The archaeological footprint at Nineveh supports this claim. Excavations have revealed the remains of Sennacherib's ambitious hydraulic works, including a monumental aqueduct at Jerwan, part of that vast canal system. Assyrian palace reliefs carved in stone vividly depict lush, terraced gardens filled with trees, vines, and pavilions, a visual catalogue of a royal landscape that matches the classical descriptions with uncanny precision. If this theory holds, it elegantly solves the central problem of the Babylonian mystery. The gardens left no clear trace in Babylon because they were never there. The wonder belonged to the Assyrian Empire, a testament to Sennacherib's own genius. This reattribution, however, creates a fascinating puzzle of historical memory. How then did the legend become so firmly attached to Babylon and Nebuchadnezzar? Scholars like Daly suggest a case of cultural convergence and confusion. When the Persian Empire conquered both Assyria and Babylon, and later when Greek historians like Herodotus traveled through the region, stories of magnificent gardens could have easily migrated. Babylon, with its towering ziggurat and massive walls, captured the Greek imagination as the ultimate ancient metropolis. It became a magnet for legends. A tale of a spectacular garden, perhaps recounted by soldiers or traders who had seen the ruins of Nineveh or heard stories of its past glory, could have been naturally transplanted onto the more famous city and its most famous king. This theory does not diminish the wonder, it deepens the mystery. It forces us to consider how history is written, how achievements can be separated from their creators and absorbed into the legacy of a more iconic name. It asks us to look beyond a single location and see the broader canvas of Mesopotamian innovation, where multiple empires competed to shape the land itself into a symbol of divine favor and absolute power. Whether in Babylon or Nineveh, the dream of a hanging garden speaks to a universal human ambition to create life where nature insists it cannot belong. The evidence for Sennacherib's claim lies not just in words but in stone. If the Hanging Gardens were indeed an Assyrian wonder, then their lifeblood was not the Euphrates alone, but an engineered river born in the distant hills. This brings us to the Aqueduct at Jerwan, a structure so advanced it feels anachronistic, a monument to water carved directly into the landscape. Built around 690 BCE, its purpose was audacious: to capture the fresh, reliable waters from mountain springs in the Kinnes region and conduct them over 30 miles across plains and valleys, all the way to the thirsty capital of Nineveh. This was not a simple ditch, it was a precision-built water highway. The scale is almost incomprehensible, constructed with over 2 million carefully cut stone blocks, each one placed to create a channel with a perfectly calculated, gentle downward slope. Modern surveys reveal its gradient was a remarkably consistent 1 in 200, meaning it dropped only a single unit of height for every 200 units of length. This meticulous incline was the key to its genius, allowing water to flow steadily and smoothly for the entire journey without rushing violently or stagnating. To ensure not a drop was lost, the builders invented a special waterproof cement, a mix of lime and mortar, to seal the joints between the massive stones. This attention to detail reveals a level of hydraulic engineering sophistication that historians once believed impossible for that era. Jerwan was not an isolated feat, it was the crown jewel of an entire hydraulic system. From this main artery, a network of smaller canals would have branched out, distributing water to fields, to the city, and crucially, to the royal precincts where gardens would have been planted. The sheer scale of this planning, a multi-decade project that reshaped the hydrology of an entire region, provides the tangible infrastructure missing from the Babylonian story. Here was a water supply of legendary proportions, capable of supporting not just a city but a paradise. Examining the enduring ruins of Jerwan offers us something priceless, a concrete benchmark. It shows definitively what was hydraulically possible in Mesopotamia at the very time the gardens were described. We no longer have to speculate about whether they could lift water to great heights. Sennacherib's inscriptions boast of doing exactly that with bronze screws. We no longer have to wonder if they could bring mountain water across vast distances. The aqueduct stands as silent, irrefutable proof. This monumental piece of engineering doesn't just point to a possible location for the gardens, it establishes the necessary condition for their existence, a guaranteed, abundant, and controlled water source on a truly imperial scale. The stones of Jerwan whisper that the dream was not only possible, it was already built. The stones of Jerwan delivered the water, but the gardens demanded life. This final, living layer presented its own monumental challenge, a question of botany as complex as any engineering puzzle. What plants could actually survive and thrive in that manufactured paradise? The answer reveals a garden designed not just for beauty, but as a living trophy case of imperial power. Hardy native species like date palms, with their deep roots and tolerance for heat, would have formed the structural backbone, providing shade and a familiar silhouette against the sky. But the true wonder, the element that stunned ancient travelers, would have been the exotics. Imagine the scent of cedar wood from the mountains of Lebanon, or the distinctive shape of a cypress tree, species that spoke of cool, high-altitude forests far from the Mesopotamian plains. These were not just decorative choices, they were diplomatic and military prizes. Kings like Sennacherib and Nebuchadnezzar led campaigns into distant, fertile lands, and they often returned with more than gold. They brought back saplings, cuttings, and seeds as living proof of their reach. A garden filled with trees from conquered territories was a powerful, silent symbol. It was a map of empire written in leaves and flowers, a collection of distant landscapes now physically reassembled under the king's control, suggesting he commanded not just people but nature itself. Yet keeping these foreign treasures alive was a constant, delicate struggle. Water alone was not enough. The soil chemistry had to be managed, perhaps amended with specific composts or minerals to mimic a plant's native ground. Pests unfamiliar in Babylon could have devastated whole sections, requiring teams of gardeners to devise early forms of biological control. And the relentless sun, so different from the dappled light of a Lebanese forest, would have necessitated innovation. Some scholars suggest the use of shaded walkways, trellises covered with fast-growing vines, or even primitive structures with translucent alabaster panels that could diffuse light, creating microclimates that functioned like early greenhouses. Each terrace, then, was a living laboratory of acclimatization. The gardeners were pioneers, learning through careful observation how to keep a cedar from Lebanon or a myrtle from Persia alive in a world it was never meant to inhabit. Their success was the ultimate testament to the system's perfection. The whirring screws and flowing channels were not an end, but a means to sustain this collection of captured landscapes. The garden was the final, breathtaking product, a political statement rooted in soil and fed by hidden rivers, declaring that the king's power could make the world itself bloom on his command. This botanical ambition pushes us to consider the garden's final, most elusive dimension, not as a static monument, but as a sensory experience. What would it have actually felt like to walk through such a place? The scent of cedar and the sound of trickling water would have defined the garden's atmosphere. Yet maintaining that delicate balance between monumental supply and precise delivery required a final layer of technology, one so common it is often overlooked. For all the talk of bronze screws and chain pumps, a quieter, more ancient machine would have been just as vital: the humble Shaduf. Picture a long wooden pole, balanced like a seesaw on an upright frame. From one end hangs a bucket, and from the other, a heavy counterweight of clay or stone. A gardener pulls the bucket down into a small reservoir, fills it, and then lets the counterweight do the work, effortlessly lifting the full bucket up to be poured into a channel or directly onto a parched bed of soil. This is not complex machinery, it is elegant physics, a lever in its purest form. This simple device had been the backbone of Mesopotamian agriculture since 3000 BCE, a tool so reliable it was used for millennia. Within the grand scheme of the hanging gardens, the Shaduf would have served as the fine-tuning instrument, while the great central lifts provided the massive volume of water to the summit. These hand-operated levers gave gardeners localized control. They could top up a secondary tank on a specific terrace, direct a little extra flow to a newly planted sapling struggling in the heat, or water a secluded corner that the main channel network did not reach efficiently. Their inclusion is a crucial reminder that the garden was not a set-it-and-forget-it monument. It was a living, breathing system that required constant, attentive maintenance at every level. The presence of the Shaduf speaks to a practical hierarchy of technology. The monumental engines were the heart, pumping life to the highest point. The network of channels and pipes were the arteries, distributing that life throughout the body. And the Shadufs were the capillaries, allowing for the final, delicate adjustments that kept every leaf vibrant. This blend of the grand and the mundane is what made the illusion of effortless abundance possible. It was a symphony of scale, where the roar of the water-lifting wheel and the soft creak of the gardener's lever played in harmony, a testament to an understanding that true wonder often rests on a foundation of simple, timeless tools. The relentless sun was the garden's most persistent adversary. In the heart of Mesopotamia, summer temperatures could soar to a blistering 120 degrees Fahrenheit, with rainfall scarce and the air so dry it seemed to drink moisture from the very air. For the engineers, this was the final, constant calculation, a battle not just to deliver water, but to keep it from vanishing into the sky. Every component of their design had to account for this evaporative siege. The channels bringing water up and through the gardens would have been carefully shaded, perhaps by the overhanging terraces above or by protective stone covers, keeping the life-giving streams cool and reducing losses before they even reached the soil. The timing of irrigation itself would have been a precise science. Watering likely occurred in the cool of the early morning or even at night, allowing the precious liquid to seep deep into the root zones before the day's heat could claim it. This was not a system you ran at noon, it was a rhythm synchronized with the desert's own harsh clock. But the gardens fought back with more than timing, they altered their own immediate world. The dense, layered planting of trees, shrubs, and vines would have created a canopy, a living umbrella that shielded the soil below from direct sun and wind, drastically slowing evaporation at ground level. This verdant mass, in turn, would have breathed, releasing moisture through its leaves in a process called transpiration. Combined with the constant trickle of water through the channels, it likely created a localized microclimate within the terraces, a pocket of slightly cooler, more humid air that would have felt miraculous against the surrounding arid plain. The structure itself may have aided this, with the towering, staggered terraces potentially funneling gentle breezes through the colonnades, providing natural ventilation to prevent stagnant, muggy air. This reveals a profound layer of their understanding. The builders were not just fighting the climate, they were leveraging it. Their knowledge came from a deep, generational intimacy with the land, learned from centuries of farming along the unpredictable Euphrates. They knew how to read the wind, the sun's arc, and the behavior of water in their specific patch of earth. The hanging gardens, therefore, were the ultimate expression of this accumulated wisdom, a deliberate and sustained act of environmental manipulation. They defied the local ecology not through magic, but through a brilliant, willful application of observed science, creating a self-reinforcing bubble of life where the desert's rules were temporarily suspended. This fragile, engineered balance raises a poignant question, one that brings us to the garden's inevitable fate. What happens when the human will that sustains such a delicate system finally turns away? The relentless sound of flowing water was more than a practical feature, it was a sacred language. In the worldview of ancient Mesopotamia, water was not merely a resource, it was the very substance of creation and divine power. The great god Enki, later known as E, was the master of the Apsu, the sweet waters that flowed beneath the earth, the source of all fertility and wisdom. To control water was to wield a fragment of this divine authority. Therefore, when a king like Sennacherib or Nebuchadnezzar engineered a river through the air, creating a perpetual, cascading oasis, he was not just solving an irrigation problem. He was performing a theological act. He was demonstrating in stone and soil and shimmering streams that his power on earth mirrored the god's power over the cosmos. The garden was a deliberate echo of paradise, a constructed Eden meant to be walked through and experienced as proof of the king's unique relationship with the divine. This transforms the entire project from a royal garden into a symbolic landscape. Consider the most iconic structure in Mesopotamian cities, the ziggurat. This was a massive step temple tower, an artificial mountain built to bridge the human and divine realms, a stairway for the gods to descend to earth. The hanging gardens can be seen as a parallel invention, a ziggurat of living flora. Instead of baked bricks ascending toward the heavens, here were terraces of fertile earth and lush greenery climbing skyward. It was a sacred mountain made not for priests to ascend, but for life itself to flourish upon. The king, by creating this, positioned his palace at the nexus of this symbolic geography. He was not just living in a grand house, he was dwelling at the foot of a man-made, life-giving mountain that he himself had willed into existence. Every visitor, every ambassador, every subject who glimpsed this wonder would have understood its message instantly. The ruler who could make water flow uphill and trees grow on stone was a ruler touched by the gods, a steward of the primordial forces of life. The sensory experience was carefully engineered to reinforce this awe. The constant, gentle murmur of water trickling through hidden channels and over small falls would have filled the air, a sound mark of abundance and supernatural order. In a land defined by arid silence or the threatening roar of seasonal floods, this controlled, perpetual flow was a sound of peace and absolute mastery. The sight of moisture glistening on leaves and sparkling in channels under the bright sun would have been a visual spectacle of luxury and divine favor. This was hydrology as theater. The engineering was not hidden away as mere infrastructure. It was partially revealed, its effects made audible and visible to amplify the psychological impact. A visitor would not just see a beautiful garden, they would hear and feel its miraculous, water-fed heartbeat, understanding on a visceral level that they were in a place where the normal rules of nature had been suspended by royal decree. Ultimately, the gardens were a statement written in water, soil, and leaf. They declared that the king's authority extended beyond laws and armies into the very fabric of the natural world. By replicating the life-giving power of the gods, he blurred the line between mortal ruler and divine agent. This symbolic function may be the most compelling reason for their legendary status. They were remembered not just because they were beautiful, but because they embodied an ancient dream of perfect order, where human ingenuity and royal power could collaborate to create a pocket of paradise on earth. This profound meaning makes their eventual disappearance all the more poignant, a silent testament to the fragility of even the most powerful symbols when the civilization that sustained them turns to dust. That final, fragile bubble of paradise could not last forever. The true legacy of the Hanging Gardens lies not in their vanished terraces, but in the deep, ancient well of knowledge that made them conceivable in the first place. This was not a sudden spark of genius, but the culmination of a tradition thousands of years in the making. The story of Mesopotamian civilization is at its heart a story of water. Every great city, from Ur to Babylon to Nineveh, was built on a simple, brutal equation: control the river or perish. The earliest Sumerian farmers, 5,000 years ago, began this epic struggle by digging simple canals to divert the floodwaters of the Tigris and Euphrates. These were not just ditches, they were the first lines of a new social contract, requiring communities to organize, labor together, and maintain shared infrastructure. Canals made surplus food possible, which supported non-farming specialists, priests, scribes, and kings. In essence, the city itself was a byproduct of hydraulic engineering. This accumulated wisdom became codified, literally written into law. Centuries before any garden was dreamed of, the famous Code of Hammurabi included specific statutes governing water use. There were rules about maintaining canals and ditches, about liability for flooding a neighbor's field through negligence. This tells us that by the 18th century BCE, water management was not just a technical skill, it was a legal and administrative framework, the bedrock of societal order. The knowledge was practical, relentless, and passed down through generations. The Shaduf, that simple lever for lifting water, appears in art and records from the earliest dynasties. The concept of the reservoir for storing water during dry periods was well understood. Techniques for lining canals with baked bricks and bitumen to prevent seepage were standard practice for major projects. What does this mean for our mysterious gardens? It means the brilliant engineers assigned to the project did not need to invent new physics. They were standing on a pyramid of pre-existing solutions. Their task was one of scale and integration, not raw invention. they took the Shaduf's principle and magnified it into a chain pump powered by a treadmill. They took the concept of a brick-lined canal and scaled it up into an aqueduct 30 miles long. They took the legal imperative for shared water management and focused it into a single, glorious royal command. The gardens were, therefore, the ultimate prestige project where utilitarian technology, born from the dirt of common fields, was elevated into a breathtaking art form. They show us a profound truth about human innovation, that the tools we create for survival can, in the right hands and with immense resources, be transformed into something that speaks to our deepest dreams. The same knowledge that fed a nation could also, for a time, make a mountain bloom in a desert. But could such a system truly work? This is no longer just a question for historians, but for engineers. In modern workshops and on computer screens, the hanging gardens are being built again, not with bricks and bitumen, but with lines of code and scale models. This is where ancient speculation meets modern simulation. Researchers can now input every variable: the proposed dimensions of the terraces, the estimated soil volume, the relentless Mesopotamian sun, and the known properties of materials like fired brick and bitumen. With a click, they can run a digital simulation that calculates the exact volume of water needed daily to keep such a garden alive. The numbers are staggering, often amounting to thousands of gallons every single day, a constant torrent that must be lifted, distributed, and perfectly managed. These models test the proposed machinery, calculating the horsepower, both human and animal, required to turn a chain pump large enough to meet that demand. They map the flow through channels, identifying where pressure might drop or where a single blockage could cascade into failure. The goal is not to prove it existed, but to prove it could have. And often the results are humbling. Simulations frequently reveal surprising efficiencies in the ancient designs. The gentle slope of a channel, derived from centuries of canal building experience, proves optimal for minimizing friction and sediment buildup. The staging of multiple Archimedes screws, rather than one colossal lift, emerges as an energy-saving masterstroke. What reads in an ancient text as a poetic impossibility often resolves in a simulation into a difficult, but entirely plausible, engineering project. This digital dialogue transforms the gardens from a static mystery into a dynamic, living puzzle. It forces us to respect the ancient engineers not as magicians, but as brilliant pragmatists, working within the strict limits of their materials and physics to achieve a dream. The most compelling evidence sometimes comes not from digging up the past, but from trying to rebuild it, one virtual drop of water at a time. Every drop delivered to the garden's roots carried a hidden danger. For the engineers, the true test was not just in bringing water up, but in knowing how to let it go. An irrigation system without an exit strategy is a blueprint for disaster. In the arid climate of Mesopotamia, water does not simply vanish. It leaves behind a silent, corrosive signature: salt. As water evaporates from the soil or is taken up by plants, dissolved minerals are left behind. With each watering cycle, this salt concentration grows, slowly poisoning the very soil meant to sustain life. Without a way to flush these salts away, the garden would have turned from a paradise into a barren, white-crusted wasteland within a few growing seasons. Furthermore, soil saturated without relief becomes waterlogged, starving plant roots of the oxygen they need to breathe, leading to rot and swift collapse. This means the unseen half of the hydraulic equation was arguably more delicate than the lifting machinery, a dedicated drainage network designed for subtle, constant escape. The solution lay in building intentional weakness into the structure, a series of calculated leaks. Within the deep, engineered sandwich of each terrace, the waterproof base of bitumen and lead was likely not a flat pan, but a gently sloped basin. Its lowest point would have been equipped with small, strategically placed openings, what masons today call weep holes. These were not mistakes but vital release valves. After an irrigation cycle, excess water would percolate down through the soil, hit the impermeable layer, and follow its subtle slope toward these holes, trickling out instead of pooling. This kept the root zone moist but not drowned. But where did that discharged water go? It could not simply pour out onto the terrace below, as that would erode its surface and reconcentrate salts. The answer points to a second hidden network, a mirror image of the delivery channels. Concealed within the massive brick support walls, there may have been vertical drain pipes or downward sloping chutes lined with ceramic or stone. These would have captured the effluent from the weep holes and conducted it safely down through the core of the structure, likely channeling it all the way back to a main drainage canal that returned it to the river or a dedicated soakaway far from the foundations. This comprehensive vision reveals the engineers were thinking in full hydrological cycles. They designed a closed loop for the garden itself, but an open one for the broader system. Water was borrowed from the river, lifted, distributed, consumed, and its excess, now carrying waste salts, was responsibly returned. It was an early form of environmental management, acknowledging that you cannot just take without a plan for the consequences. The precision involved is staggering, a balance between retention and release. The weep holes had to be large enough to prevent clogging from silt, yet small enough to not drain the soil too quickly. The slope of the waterproof layer had to be perfect, too steep, and the water would run off before hydrating the soil, too shallow and it would stagnate. A single terrace with a failed drain could become a heavy, sodden weight, threatening the structural integrity of everything below it, while simultaneously killing its own plant life from the roots up. The drainage system, silent and invisible, was the garden's immune system. While the lifting screws and channels were the beating heart, these hidden pathways were the kidneys and lungs, performing the essential, unglamorous work of filtration and waste removal that kept the entire organism healthy. Its flawless operation meant the difference between a living monument and a tomb of salted earth, proving that the most profound engineering often happens in the details nobody is meant to see. The ambition to bend water to human will echoed across continents. While Babylon dreamed of vertical gardens, other ancient empires were writing their own hydraulic legends on the landscape. The Romans perfected the art of the aqueduct, building stone rivers in the sky that marched across valleys on towering arches to feed the baths and fountains of cities like Rome itself. In the arid plateaus of Persia, engineers mastered a different kind of magic, the qanat. These were not monuments of stone, but hidden masterpieces of subterranean logic, gently sloping tunnels dug deep into alluvial fans to tap groundwater and guide it for miles to the surface without a single drop lost to evaporation. Even earlier, in the meticulously planned cities of the Indus Valley, we find evidence of a civilization obsessed with water management, with covered drains, public baths, and wells integrated into the very fabric of urban life from Mohenjo-Daro to Harappa. Each of these was a brilliant answer to the same fundamental question: how do you sustain a complex society in a world where water is never quite where or when you need it? So what makes the story of the Hanging Garden stand apart in this global chorus of hydraulic genius? It is not the scale of water moved, for the Roman aqueducts dwarfed it in volume. It is not the cleverness of the delivery method, for the Persian qanat represents a profound understanding of geology. The singularity of the gardens lies in their purpose. They were not built for public health, agricultural irrigation, or urban sanitation. They were hydraulics in the service of pure spectacle, an engine designed not to sustain life in a practical sense, but to create a breathtaking illusion of it. The water lifted with such effort was not destined for a drinking fountain or a field of grain, but for the roots of a cedar tree planted solely for its beauty and symbolic power. This vertical integration of utility and art is what strains belief and fuels legend. It asks us to accept that an entire civilization's hard-won water wisdom was directed toward a single, staggeringly luxurious goal: to make a mountain of flowers bloom because a king decreed it possible. This comparative lens does not diminish the gardens, it sharpens their mystery. It shows that the underlying technology was absolutely plausible within the ancient world's known capabilities. The Romans could move water 50 miles, the Persians could find it deep underground, so why couldn't the Babylonians or Assyrians lift it a few hundred feet? The feasibility of the mechanics is not in serious doubt. What remains extraordinary is the application, the choice to dedicate such immense resources not to conquering a practical problem, but to constructing a living metaphor. This places the gardens at a fascinating crossroads in the history of engineering, where the line between a public work and a private dream becomes beautifully, impossibly blurred. They remind us that ancient innovation was driven not just by necessity, but by a profound desire to manifest power, identity, and even divinity in the physical world. The aqueduct declared, "We are an organized people." The canat whispered, "We are a people who listen to the earth." But the hanging gardens shouted, "We are a people who can make the earth itself obey our most extravagant wishes." That final, fragile bubble of paradise could not last forever. A garden is a living machine, and like any machine, it requires constant, devoted care. The moment that care stops, the system begins to unravel with startling speed. In the harsh Mesopotamian climate, the plants themselves would have been the first to perish. Without the daily rhythm of the water lift and the gardener's hand, the exotic cedars and cypresses, already living on borrowed time far from their native climates, would have withered within a single brutal season. Their roots would have dried, their leaves turned to dust, and the vibrant green curtain would have faded into a skeleton of brittle branches. But the structure's demise would have been a slower, more complex drama. The great enemy was not just neglect, but the very environment the gardens had defied. Canals, both the grand feeder from the river and the intricate internal network, are not static. They are living features that demand constant dredging. The Euphrates and the city's own runoff carried immense loads of fine silt. Without teams of laborers to clear these channels, they would have gradually filled, first slowing the water's flow to a trickle, then stopping it entirely. The lifeblood of the system would have been choked off at the source. Then came the silent, structural betrayal. The bitumen sealant, that miraculous black glue holding everything together, is not eternal. Under the relentless cycle of heat and the residual moisture within the walls, it would have eventually dried, cracked, and lost its adhesive power. A single crack in the waterproof lining of a terrace was a cascading failure. Water meant for the soil would seep into the brickwork behind it. In the scorching heat, this moisture would expand, and in the rare cool night, it would contract. This endless, microscopic push and pull would work the bricks apart from the inside, turning solid walls into fragile honeycombs. A major earthquake, a not uncommon event in the region, could have been the final blow, toppling the already weakened terraces in a catastrophic collapse. But perhaps the most mundane force was the most decisive, the relentless repurposing of a dying city. When Babylon's political power waned after conquests by the Persians and later the successors of Alexander the Great, the royal capital shifted elsewhere. A monumental structure like the gardens, tied directly to a specific king's glory, lost its patron and its purpose. Its materials were far too valuable to leave in place. Teams would have arrived to systematically dismantle it, quarrying the precious fired bricks for new buildings, pulling the lead linings from channels to melt down, and salvaging the great timber beams and wheels of the lifting devices. This was not vandalism, it was practical recycling. What remained was a mound of rubble, the core of sun-dried mud brick and debris that had been hidden inside the elegant stone and brick facade. Over centuries, wind and rain would have smoothed this mound into just another anonymous hill, a tell, indistinguishable from the dozens of others that mark the sites of forgotten Mesopotamian cities. This explains the profound archaeological silence. The gardens did not vanish in a single cataclysm. They underwent a slow, thorough unmaking. Their most distinctive components, the stone terraces, the metal pipes, the exotic soil, were either carried away or dissolved back into the earth from which they came. What little might remain, a strange pattern of holes that could be foundation posts, or a concentration of organic material in an unusual location, is easily misinterpreted. Without a clear inscription or a definitive ground plan, these faint whispers in the dirt are just ambiguous clues, lost in the grand, layered story of a city that was itself rebuilt and plundered for millennia. The garden's greatest legacy may be their very elusiveness, a reminder that even the most solid human achievements are conversations with time, and time always has the final word. The echo of its collapse was not the end of the story. Long after the last brick was repurposed and the final channel filled with silt, the hanging gardens began a second life, one far more enduring than stone. They migrated from the physical world into the boundless realm of art and story, becoming a universal symbol for a paradise that was always just out of reach. We can trace this journey in the vibrant pigments of a medieval manuscript where an illuminator who had never seen a palm tree painstakingly painted a fantastical, multi-tiered castle dripping with greenery based on a traveler's tale. We see it again in the canvases of Renaissance painters who reimagine the gardens as a backdrop for biblical scenes, a fitting stand-in for the Garden of Eden itself. This was not a failure of memory but a transformation. The gardens ceased to be a specific place in Babylon and became an archetype, the impossible garden, a motif that artists and writers could use to explore themes of love, power, longing, and the human desire to master nature. This cultural afterlife reveals a profound truth about how we process loss and mystery. When a wonder vanishes without a clear grave, our imagination rushes in to fill the void. The gardens became a blank canvas upon which every era could project its own ideals of beauty and order. In Persian culture, the concept of the paradisa, a walled garden or paradise, echoed the same principles of controlled, abundant nature within a defined, sacred space. Later, the grand European botanical gardens of the 17th and 18th centuries, with their terraced layouts and collections of exotic plants from across the globe, were direct descendants of that ancient dream, though now framed by the lens of scientific exploration rather than royal divinity. Even in modern cinema, the image of lush, elevated gardens in epic historical films is a direct inheritance from those classical descriptions, a visual shorthand for opulence and advanced civilization. This enduring fascination is the garden's ultimate legacy. They proved that an idea could be more durable than any hydraulic screw. The physical structure was vulnerable to conquest, decay, and recycling, but the story of a king who built a mountain of greenery for his queen, of engineers who made water flow uphill, of a living paradise in a desert, proved indestructible. It transcended archaeology to become a fixture of our collective dreams. We are drawn to it not because we have its blueprints, but precisely because we do not. The mystery is the magnet. It invites us to wonder, to engineer our own solutions, to debate its location, and to keep searching for that line between history and legend. In doing so, we participate in a tradition that is thousands of years old, adding our own layer of interpretation to the myth. The hanging gardens, therefore, never truly ceased to exist. They simply changed form, evolving from a wonder of the world into a wonder of the human mind, a permanent resident in the landscape of our imagination where they continue to bloom perpetually in the stories we choose to tell. The true price of a hanging garden was measured not in gold but in the daily labor of thousands. To sustain that vertical paradise, the royal treasury would have funded a permanent miniature city within a city, a relentless economic engine humming just to keep the illusion alive. Beyond the initial, staggering outlay for imported stone, lead lining, and millions of fired bricks, the ongoing costs were a river of expenditure that never ceased. Consider the supply chain alone. Teams of workers needed to be fed, housed, and provided with tools, their rations of grain, beer, and dates a constant line item in the palace accounts. The animals powering the water-lifting treadmills required fodder and handlers. Specialist gardeners, possibly brought from conquered regions to tend their native plants, commanded higher wages. And the materials themselves demanded upkeep, a steady stream of bitumen to reseal cracks, new ceramic pipes to replace broken ones, and timber for repairing the massive screws and wheels. This was not a one-time construction project. It was a perpetual financial commitment, a deliberate siphoning of state resources into a single, breathtaking spectacle. Why would any ruler choose such a burden? The answer transforms the gardens from a mere luxury into a profound instrument of statecraft. This expenditure was a strategic investment in what we now call soft power. By publicly demonstrating his ability to command nature and sustain such an impossible marvel, the king broadcast an unmistakable message of stability, divine favor, and limitless resources to both his own people and foreign ambassadors. It was a permanent advertisement, a living billboard that declared, "A kingdom that can make this is a kingdom that can do anything." The economic choice to fund the gardens over, say, another regiment of soldiers or a new granary, was a calculated bet that awe could be as potent a tool for control as fear. But the investment may have yielded more tangible returns as well. Within those walled terraces, the king's gardeners operated the most advanced agricultural research station in the world. They were likely experimenting with the acclimatization of incredibly valuable crops, spices, medicinal herbs, or rare fruits from across the empire. A successful harvest of cinnamon saplings or date palm varieties with higher yields could have generated exclusive royal monopolies, turning the garden into a source of economic innovation as well as beauty. Furthermore, the gardens provided a tangible benefit for the machinery of rule. In the sweltering Mesopotamian summer, this cool, shaded, and fragrant retreat would have been the ultimate executive suite. Important meetings, diplomatic negotiations, and royal deliberations could take place in an environment that literally embodied the kingdom's prosperity and control, subtly influencing every conversation held within its bounds. The gardens, therefore, were a masterful fusion of economics and ideology. The vast wealth poured into them was not wasted. It was transformed into a multi-purpose asset, a tool for propaganda, a laboratory for botany, and a stage for governance. This perspective forces us to see ancient wonders not as separate from the gritty reality of taxes and grain shipments, but as the direct products of it. The Hanging Garden was, in the end, a profound statement of priority, proving that a civilization's greatest ambitions are always reflected in what it chooses relentlessly to pay for. The most persistent fiction is the garden's very name. The word hanging conjures images of baskets suspended from chains, a structure floating miraculously in the air. This poetic misreading has endured for centuries, but the original Greek and Roman descriptions point to something far more grounded yet equally astonishing. The term likely referred to the overhanging terraces themselves, where plants spilled over balconies and cascaded down retaining walls, creating the visual effect of a lush, green curtain. It was a garden that hung, not one that was hung. This subtle shift in understanding is the first step in a larger scholarly process, one that carefully separates the romantic embroidery from the plausible engineering. Another layer of myth involves the legendary Queen Semiramis, a figure woven from the deeds of several real Assyrian queens, and then elevated into a near goddess of superhuman achievement. Later Greek and Roman writers, enchanted by her legend, often credited her with founding Babylon and building its wonders, including the gardens. This attribution, while captivating, collapses timelines and conflates empires, placing a semi-mythical ruler centuries before the historical kings who actually possessed the resources and recorded the project. Modern historians approach these classical texts not as fact, but as a palimpsest, a manuscript where later stories have been written over earlier truths. They practice source criticism, asking essential questions. Who wrote this account and when? Did they ever visit Babylon, or are they repeating hearsay? What were their sources and what cultural biases might they have carried? The descriptions from Diodorus and Strabo, for instance, are invaluable, but they are also tourist postcards written hundreds of years after the fact, filtered through the lens of Greek fascination with Eastern opulence. Their goal was often to inspire wonder, not to provide a builder's manual. This critical lens allows us to weigh each claim against the hard evidence of archaeology and environmental science. The romantic notion of a garden solely sustained by the distant Euphrates, for example, bumps against the practical limits of lifting water hundreds of feet with ancient technology. This friction is what led researchers to seriously consider Sennacherib's aqueduct at Jerwan, a documented, contemporary solution to the water supply problem that the Babylonian stories lack. Similarly, extravagant estimates for the garden's height, sometimes described as reaching the city walls, are measured against the structural limits of baked brick and the immense weight of saturated soil. Debunking these myths is not an act of destruction but of careful excavation. It peels away the fantastical to reveal the contours of a real, achievable marvel. The truth is often more impressive than the fiction because it speaks to what human beings, with the tools and knowledge of their time, could actually accomplish. A garden built on stone terraces, fed by bronze screws lifting water from a dedicated aqueduct, represents a triumph of organized society, applied physics, and botanical skill. That is a wonder built not by magic or demigods, but by the collective genius of engineers, laborers, and gardeners. This journey from airy legend to grounded reality does not diminish the garden's splendor. It deepens our respect for the civilization that dared to conceive them. The real story invites us to marvel not at a fairy tale, but at the tangible limits of ancient ambition, where myth meets the meticulous, earthbound craft of making the impossible flow. Even with our most advanced reconstructions, fundamental questions linger in the silence. We can model the water flow and calculate the soil volume, but the exact heartbeat of the system remains a guess. What specific machine stood in that hidden chamber? Was it the rhythmic groan of a chain pump with its endless loop of buckets, or the steady turning of a monumental bronze screw? The choice between them speaks to a deeper unknown, the daily management of this living engine. How many laborers were required to keep the wheels turning, and in what shifts did they work under the oppressive heat? Was the operation continuous, a relentless 24-hour cycle, or was it a carefully timed performance, perhaps activated only in the cool hours of dawn and dusk to coincide with the gardener's rounds? The logistics of maintenance are another blank space. Replacing a worn leather bucket on a chain or clearing silt from a crucial channel would have required a temporary shutdown. How did they keep the plants from suffering during these necessary repairs? Perhaps they had redundant systems, secondary reservoirs that could release stored water to keep the terraces hydrated while the primary lift was under repair. But then that raises another question: where were these holding tanks located? Were they vast cisterns buried beneath the lowest terrace, or smaller, distributed basins on each level? The absence of any clear archaeological footprint for such features means we are designing in the dark. Even the garden's seasonal rhythm is a mystery. Was it a year-round spectacle of evergreen luxury, or did it have a primary season, a burst of vibrant color and fruit following the cooler, wetter months, with more subdued maintenance during the brutal peak of summer? The classical sources, writing from a Mediterranean perspective, describe an eternal spring, but the reality on the ground would have been a constant negotiation with the desert's harsh calendar. These are not trivial details, they are the essence of how the wonder functioned as a living, breathing entity. The lack of a definitive archaeological context, that single, undeniable foundation stone inscribed with the gardener's manual, means these operational mysteries may never be settled. Yet, paradoxically, these gaps are what grant the gardens their enduring power. They are not a closed case in a history book, but an open conversation with the past. Each unanswered question is an invitation, a blank space on the map that compels every new generation of historians, engineers, and even amateur dreamers to pick up the tools of their time and propose a solution. The mystery persists not as a failure of scholarship, but as its greatest catalyst, reminding us that some wonders are defined as much by what we do not know as by what we can prove. The silent principles that once made stone bloom are now finding new life in steel and glass. The ancient challenge of lifting water against gravity to sustain life in an arid landscape echoes directly in our modern skyscrapers, where architects design vertical farms and living walls to bring nature back into dense, concrete cities. The garden's core innovation, stacking fertile layers to maximize space and create self-sustaining ecosystems, is a direct ancestor of today's hydroponic and aeroponic agriculture, where food is grown in towering, water-efficient facilities without any soil at all. This is more than a historical curiosity. It is a form of biomimicry where engineers look to nature and sometimes to ancient human adaptations for elegant solutions to contemporary problems. The Hanging Gardens presented a masterclass in integrated systems, where the structure, the water delivery, the drainage, and the plant life were all part of a single, interdependent design. Modern sustainable architecture strives for this same harmony, creating buildings that harvest rainwater, recycle greywater, and use passive cooling techniques, much like those shaded, breezy terraces once moderated their own microclimate. The ancient engineers understood that to defy a harsh environment, you must work with its rhythms, not just fight against them, a lesson that is profoundly relevant as we design cities for a changing climate. This perspective transforms the gardens from a lost wonder into a living textbook. Their legacy is not in their vanished bricks, but in the enduring logic of their design, a logic that prioritizes circular systems over linear waste. When a contemporary urban planner looks at a water-scarce region and proposes a network of green roofs and permeable surfaces to cool the city and manage stormwater, they are, in essence, applying a Babylonian principle on a metropolitan scale. The gardens prove that the most advanced solutions are often those that are beautifully woven into the fabric of daily life, where technology serves biology to create something greater than the sum of its parts. Studying this ancient feat, therefore, is not an escape into the past, but a source of inspiration for a more resilient future. It reminds us that sustainability is not a new invention, but often a rediscovery of ancient wisdom, of blueprints for balance written long ago in stone, brick, and the timeless flow of water. That human longing for a lost landscape is captured in the story's most enduring heartbeat, the tale of a king and a queen. Behind the calculations of water volume and structural load, classical historians preserved a poignant motive that the gardens were built by King Nebuchadnezzar II for his wife, Amytis, a princess from the green, mountainous lands of Media. She is said to have grown despondent in the flat, arid expanse of Babylon, longing for the forested hills of her home. In response, the king commanded not just a garden, but a recreated homeland, a vertical, living portrait of the world she missed. Whether this account is precise history or a later romantic embellishment is almost secondary to its power. It performs a vital alchemy, transforming the wonder from a cold display of state power into a monument of intimate emotion. An act of political alliance becomes an act of empathy. A ruler's decree becomes a partner's gift. This narrative thread, woven through the technical fabric, reminds us that the most imposing structures often rise from the deepest human wells, from loneliness, from the desire to comfort, and from the simple, profound wish to bring a beloved face the sight of something familiar and beautiful. It personalizes the anonymous thousands who labored, giving their work a purpose that transcends engineering. We are invited to see not just a king demonstrating divine favor, but a person trying to solve a problem of the heart with the tools of an empire. This layer of story connects us across the millennia not to abstract civilizations, but to recognizable individuals. It suggests that the drive to build wonders is fueled by the same complex mix of impulses that move us today. The public need to project strength intertwined with the private need to express care, to impress, to create legacy, and to alleviate sorrow. The gardens, in this light, become a dialogue between the heart and the hand, where longing provided the inspiration and genius provided the method. This human dimension ensures the wonder never feels like a mere machine, but like a lived experience, a place where someone might have walked, breathed in the scent of transplanted cedars, and for a moment felt a little less far from home. It is this emotional core that has allowed the legend to resonate for centuries, long after the last brick fell, because it speaks to a universal truth that our greatest endeavors are often, at their root, attempts to make the people we care for feel seen, and to bring the places they cherish a little closer. The most lasting legacy of the gardens may be the space they occupy in our collective imagination. Regardless of their precise coordinates on a map, they have ascended to become an idea, a universal symbol for the human longing to carve out a piece of paradise. This conceptual garden, nourished by centuries of retelling, is in many ways more resilient than any stone terrace could ever be. It speaks to a deep-seated drive within us, the urge to confront a harsh or limiting environment and not just survive within it, but to transform it into something lush, ordered, and beautiful. The story is not really about a specific king or queen, but about our species' persistent dream of overcoming natural boundaries through sheer ingenuity and shared purpose. Whether the foundations lie in Babylon, Nineveh, or somewhere between history and legend, the idea itself has irrevocably shaped our vision of what civilization can achieve. It stands at a perfect crossroads where nature is not conquered but collaborated with, where technology serves not just utility but awe, and where art finds its expression in living, growing form. Our centuries-long quest to pin down this phantom, to excavate its blueprints from dust and text, reveals something profound about ourselves. The search is its own kind of testimony. We are fascinated by this intersection of elements because we see in it a reflection of our own potential, a mirror held up to our capacity for wonder and creation. As we step back from the hydraulic calculations and material analyses, we are left with a realization that transcends engineering. The true wonder is not the machine that lifted the water, but the mind that first envisioned lifting it. It is the enduring spirit that looks at a desert and dreams of a waterfall, that studies the mechanics of a lever and sees not just a tool for drawing water from a well, but the means to build a mountain in the sky. The gardens, in all their elusive glory, remind us that our greatest monuments often begin as a fragile idea, a whisper of what if, before they are ever given weight and form by the countless hands that believe in making the impossible real. The final question is not where they stood, but why they still stand so tall in our minds. Our journey through the hydraulic heart of this ancient wonder has traveled from the silt-laden banks of the Euphrates to the cool, engineered shade of speculative terraces, through scholarly debates that shift the very ground beneath our feet, and into the profound symbolism of a garden that was both a kingdom's boast and a personal solace. We have reconstructed not just a machine, but a philosophy, one that saw water, stone, soil, and human labor as threads in a single, magnificent tapestry. The true marvel lies in that integrated vision, where a chain pump's groan was inseparable from a cedar's scent, where a bitumen seal was as vital as a blooming flower. It was a system that thought in full cycles, understanding that to give life, you must also manage its waste, that to defy a desert, you must first listen to its rhythms. While the physical gardens have long since returned to the earth, either in Babylon or Nineveh, the relentless pursuit to understand them has illuminated a civilization of astonishing capability. This quest reveals less about a lost pile of bricks and more about the enduring human spirit, that irrepressible drive to look at a barren horizon and dream of a waterfall, to wield the tools of survival in the service of something breathtaking. That drive is the garden's true legacy, a seed of ambition that continues to sprout in our own dreams of vertical farms and sustainable cities. If unraveling this ancient mystery has captivated you, consider joining our community for more journeys into the hidden engines of history. We would love to hear your perspective in the comments below. Where do you believe the weight of evidence lies, in Babylon's royal precinct or alongside Sennacherib's aqueduct at Nineveh? And of all the ingenious systems we explored, which piece of engineering, the screw, the chain pump, the hidden drains, left you most in awe of the ancient mind?